They told me I was a disgrace at Thanksgiving. Those words cut deeper than any cold November wind biting down the streets of Chicago where I live. I sat there, invisible at the table, my hands trembling as the laughter and harsh whispers mingled like knives. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Margaret, and at 72 years old, I thought I knew what loneliness felt like. I was wrong. Every morning, I wake up before dawn in my modest apartment on the South Side. The smell of burnt coffee, a bitter reminder of how my life tastes lately. The radiator clanks like old bones settling, and I shuffle through the clutter of unopened letters, medical bills, and collection notices that seem to multiply like weeds in the corners of my kitchen table. My body feels heavy these days, weighted down not just by the arthritis that makes my fingers curl like autumn leaves, but by years of emotional neglect that I've carried like stones in my chest. The apartment is quiet except for the distant rumble of the L train carrying people to jobs, to families, to lives that matter. Mine echoes with emptiness. That Thanksgiving morning, I had woken up early to prepare my famous pumpkin pie. The recipe belonged to my mother, passed down through 3 generations of women who knew how to put love into every ingredient. I could still smell the cinnamon and nutmeg as I carefully measured each spoonful, my arthritic hands moving slowly but deliberately. This would be the year, I told myself. This would be the year my children would see me not as a burden, but as their mother, their grandmother, the woman who had given them everything. I had dressed carefully that morning, choosing my best navy dress, the one I'd worn to Elijah's wedding 15 years ago when he still hugged me tight and called me his best girl. I applied lipstick with shaking hands, trying to cover the pale lines that seemed to have appeared overnight. In the mirror, I saw my mother's eyes staring back at me, tired but hopeful. The text message came at 10:30 in the morning, just as I was wrapping the pie in my grandmother's embroidered cloth. The phone buzzed against the counter like an angry wasp, and I fumbled to read it with my reading glasses sliding down my nose. Mom, change of plans. Dinner's moved to Nora's friend's house. Limited space. Maybe next time. Maybe next time. 4 words that shattered my heart like glass hitting concrete. I stood there in my empty kitchen, holding that pie, feeling the weight of 50 years of motherhood pressing down on my shoulders. The photos on my mantelpiece seemed to mock me in the dim November light. There was Elijah at 5, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the baseball glove I'd saved 3 months to buy him. Nora at her high school graduation, tears of joy streaming down both our faces. James on his wedding day, spinning me around the dance floor while his bride laughed at our silly steps. Ghosts of a past that felt more distant with every breath I took. I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever felt invisible to the people you love most? Have you ever wondered when exactly you stopped mattering to your own children? I wrapped that pie back up and put it in my refrigerator, where it would sit untouched for a week before I finally threw it away, moldy and forgotten. Let me tell you about the life I built before it all crumbled around me like autumn leaves on Chicago's unforgiving streets. I raised 3 children in this city after their father decided we weren't worth staying for. Elijah, my firstborn, came into this world during a blizzard in 1975, screaming with the kind of determination that would define his entire life. Nora followed 2 years later, quiet and observant, with eyes that seemed to see everything and judge accordingly. James, my baby, arrived during the summer of 1982, all smiles and charm even from the delivery room. Each of them was a whole universe of dreams and troubles, and I was their sun, their moon, their entire solar system for the better part of 3 decades. When Robert left us that December night in 1989, snow falling like tears outside our kitchen window, I made a promise to myself and to God that my children would never want for anything. I would work 2 jobs if I had to. I would skip meals so they could eat. I would wear the same coat for 10 winters so they could have new shoes for school. And that's exactly what I did. I remember the late-night talks after homework was finished and the dishes were done. Elijah would sit at our small kitchen table, his teenage frame folding into the chair like a question mark, and tell me about his dreams of playing professional basketball. I would listen for hours, my eyes burning from my double shift at the hospital cafeteria and the overnight cleaning job at the office building downtown, but I never let him see my exhaustion. Mom, do you think I'm good enough? He'd ask, his voice cracking with uncertainty. Baby, you're good enough for anything you set your mind to, I'd whisper, placing my work-worn hands on his shoulders. You just have to believe it yourself. Those were the days when my love felt like enough, when my sacrifices felt meaningful. I stretched my paycheck so thin you could see through it, but somehow I made it work. When Elijah needed new basketball shoes, I sold my mother's pearl necklace. When Nora wanted to join the debate team but couldn't afford the tournament fees, I picked up extra shifts until my feet bled in my shoes. When James decided he wanted to learn piano, I bought him a used keyboard with money I'd been saving for new glasses, squinting through my old prescription for another 2 years. Every morning, I'd wake up at 4:30 to pack their lunches with care, cutting their sandwiches into perfect triangles, tucking little notes into their brown bags that said, "Mama loves you," or "You're going to do great today." I'd drive them to school in my aging Chevy Malibu, the heater broken but the radio playing their favorite songs, singing along with voices hoarse from working and worrying. School plays, basketball games, debate tournaments, piano recitals. If one of my children was performing, I was there in the front row, my face beaming with pride even when I'd had to choose between paying the electric bill on time or buying a dress that didn't have holes in it. I always chose my children. College applications nearly broke me, but I found a way. I took out loans I knew I'd be paying for the rest of my life. I worked Christmas Eve and New Year's Day to pay for SAT prep courses and application fees. I drove them to campus visits in my car, held together by prayer and duct tape, sleeping in that car in parking lots because I couldn't afford hotel rooms. "Mom, you don't have to sacrifice so much for us," Nora said one evening when she caught me mending my only work uniform for the 3rd time. "It's not a sacrifice when it's for people you love," I told her, and I meant every word. But what nobody tells you about sacrifice is that it creates a hunger in you that never gets fed. You give and give and give until you forget what it feels like to receive. You love and love and love until you can't remember the last time someone loved you back the same way. The cracks started showing when they began their own lives. Elijah graduated from DePaul University with a business degree I'd helped fund with my retirement savings. He got a good job downtown, bought a condo in Lincoln Park, and suddenly my phone calls went straight to voicemail. When we did speak, it was brief and transactional. "Mom, I need you to co-sign this loan for me." "Mom, can you watch the kids this weekend?" "Sarah and I need some time alone." "Mom, you don't understand the pressure I'm under at work." He'd developed a way of making me feel like my concerns were trivial, my needs inconvenient. When I'd mention feeling lonely or ask if we could have dinner together, he'd sigh like a man carrying the weight of the world. "You're just being dramatic," he'd say, his voice carrying that tone people use when they're tired of dealing with you. Nora went to Northwestern on academic scholarships I'd helped her apply for, spending countless evenings at our kitchen table perfecting her essays while I proofread and encouraged her through every draft. She majored in psychology, which I thought meant she'd understand people's emotions better. Instead, she seemed to use her education to dismiss mine. "Mother, you're catastrophizing," she'd say whenever I expressed hurt or disappointment. "You need to adjust your expectations." She moved to the North Shore after graduation, married a lawyer, and had 2 beautiful children I saw maybe 4 times a year. Our conversations became clinical, like I was one of her patients instead of the woman who had taught her how to tie her shoes and dry her tears. "You're being overly sensitive," became her favorite phrase. Cold silence became her weapon of choice. James, my charming baby, grew up to be exactly that. Charming. Too charming. He learned early how to use his smile and his words to get what he wanted, and what he usually wanted was money. He'd show up at my apartment with flowers and compliments, spinning stories about opportunities and investments that always seemed to require my financial backing. "Mom, you're the only one who believes in me," he'd say, his eyes sparkling with sincerity and something else I didn't want to name. "Just this once, and then I'll be able to pay you back everything I owe." But once became twice. Twice became always, and the money I lent never came back. "You're just being old-fashioned," he'd snap when I'd ask about repayment. "Family helps family. That's what you taught us, right?" He was right. That was what I'd taught them. But somehow, in my lessons about giving and loving and supporting each other, I'd forgotten to teach them how to give back. The first time money disappeared from my account without permission, I told myself it was a mistake. The second time, I told myself it was an emergency. By the 5th time, I couldn't lie to myself anymore. But I also couldn't bring myself to confront them. What kind of mother accuses her own children of stealing? I started to doubt everything. My parenting, my decisions, my worth as a human being. Was I demanding too much? Were my feelings about love and respect just outdated expectations from a different generation? Had I raised my children to see me as nothing more than a bank account with arms? The walls I'd built around my hope began to crack like paint on old wood, and inside, the loneliness grew like a shadow at sunset, stretching longer and darker with every passing day. Some nights I'd lie in my small bedroom listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, and wonder if this was what dying felt like. Not the dramatic, sudden kind of dying they show in movies, but the slow, quiet kind where pieces of your soul just stop working, one by one, until you're still breathing but no longer really alive. Do you know that feeling? That creeping suspicion that the people you'd die for wouldn't cross the street to help you? I was about to find out just how true that was. The microaggressions started small, like paper cuts that sting but don't seem worth mentioning. My 70th birthday came and went without so much as a phone call from any of my children. When I mentioned it casually during our next conversation, Elijah said he'd been busy with work. Nora claimed she thought it was the following week, and James promised to make it up to me with a dinner that never materialized. "It's just a number, Mom," Nora said dismissively. "You shouldn't need validation from arbitrary dates." But it wasn't about the date. It was about being remembered, about mattering enough for someone to mark time by your existence. My arthritis worsened that winter, my hands becoming gnarled and painful, especially during Chicago's brutal cold months. I'd mentioned the pain during our phone calls, hoping for a little sympathy, maybe an offer to help with grocery shopping or cleaning. "You're being dramatic," Elijah would say. "Everyone gets aches and pains as they age. Have you tried meditation?" Nora would suggest. "Pain is often psychological. Maybe you should get out more," James would offer. Exercise is good for arthritis. None of them offered to help. None of them offered to visit. They had solutions for everything except the real problem, which was that I was alone and struggling and desperately needed my family to care. The loneliness was becoming a physical presence in my apartment, sitting beside me at meals, lying next to me in bed, following me to the grocery store where I'd find myself lingering just to hear human voices, even if they weren't speaking to me. I started going to early morning mass at St. Alphonsus, not because I was particularly religious, but because it was a place where people acknowledged your presence, where the priest would nod at me from the altar and Mrs. Chen would pat my hand during the sign of peace. It was an hour a day where I existed in the world as more than just a burden or a bank account. But even there, surrounded by other lonely people seeking comfort in ritual and community, I felt the weight of my family's neglect, like stones in my pockets. One Tuesday afternoon in February, I was organizing my medical bills at the kitchen table when I decided to check my credit card statement online. My fingers moved slowly over the laptop keyboard Elijah had bought me 3 years ago, supposedly to keep me connected, but which mostly served to highlight how disconnected I actually was. What I found made my blood freeze despite the radiator's warmth. Charge after charge I didn't recognize. A $2,000 payment to a luxury resort in Miami, $800 at a high-end restaurant in Lincoln Park, $300 for something called executive car service, $500 at a jewelry store I'd never heard of. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through months of unauthorized charges. Someone had been using my credit card for cash advances, luxury purchases, and what looked like an expensive vacation I'd never been invited on. The worst part wasn't the money, though God knows I couldn't afford to lose it. It was the calculated deception, the casual way they'd helped themselves to my financial security. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning, my chest getting tighter with every line item. Then I found something that shattered whatever was left of my heart. A charge for $1,500 to something called Lakeside Event Planning. The date was December 15th, just 2 months ago. Curious and dreading what I might find, I called the number listed on the charge. "Lakeside Event Planning. This is Sandra. How can I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about a charge on my credit card from December 15th. I want to understand what it was for." "Of course, let me look that up. What's the last 4 digits of your card?" I read them to her, my voice already starting to crack. "Oh yes, here it is. That was for the Johnson family reunion at the Fairmont Hotel. Beautiful event, about 50 guests. The family was so happy with how everything turned out." The phone slipped in my sweaty palm. "The Johnson family reunion?" "Yes, such a lovely family. The organizer, I believe his name was Elijah, said it was a surprise celebration for their grandmother's recovery from surgery. They had the ballroom, catering, live music, the works. Everyone had such a wonderful time. My grandmother's recovery from surgery. They'd told people I was recovering from surgery. They'd planned and hosted a family reunion, charged it to my credit card, and told everyone it was for me while making sure I never knew it existed. Ma'am, are you still there? I hung up without answering. I sat at that table for what felt like hours, staring at my laptop screen, reading and rereading those charges. My own family had thrown a party in my honor, celebrating my supposed recovery from surgery, and hadn't invited me. They'd used my money to pay for it, my name to justify it, and my absence was so routine that apparently no one even asked where I was. The quiet broke inside me then. Not like a dam bursting, but like something delicate finally giving up after being bent too far for too long. The coffee cup I'd been holding slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered across the linoleum floor. the sound sharp and final in the winter silence. I didn't cry at first. I just sat there, looking at the broken pieces of blue ceramic scattered around my feet, like fragments of my faith in the people I'd raised with my own breath and heartbeat. Silent tears came later, tracing lines down my cheeks like rain on a window, falling onto the laptop keyboard where the evidence of their betrayal still glowed on the screen. For the first time in decades, I wondered if I could say no. Not just to money, not just to favors, but to the entire arrangement where I gave everything and received nothing but the privilege of giving more. Could I stop being their wallet, their convenient grandmother, their emotional punching bag? Could I look in the mirror and choose myself for once? Fear clawed at me from the inside. The terror of being completely alone weighed against my desperate need for basic human respect. What if saying no meant losing them forever? What if standing up for myself meant spending my remaining years in total solitude? But then another thought crept in, quiet, but persistent. What if I was already alone? What if this relationship I'd been clinging to was just an illusion, a one-sided performance where I played the role of loving mother while they played the role of entitled beneficiaries? Later that night, I found myself clutching my mother's faded photograph, the one where she's wearing her wedding dress and smiling like she believed the world would keep its promises to her. My mother, who'd raised 5 children during the Depression, who'd never had the luxury of doubt or the privilege of self-pity, who'd taught me that love was action, not words. But she'd also been loved back. Her children had visited her, called her, included her in their lives until the day she died at 87, surrounded by 3 generations of family who genuinely wanted to be there. I packed away the photo albums that night, every single one, boxing up all those birthday parties and graduations and holidays where I'd believed we were building something together instead of me just funding their happiness while they slowly erased me from the picture. Standing at my bathroom mirror in my faded flannel nightgown, I looked at my reflection and tried to find the woman I'd been before I became their mother, before I became their bank, before I became their convenient solution to problems they didn't want to solve themselves. I was still in there somewhere, underneath all the hurt and disappointment and self-doubt. The question was whether it was too late to let her out. Have you ever reached that moment where you realize you have to choose between being loved and being respected? Where you understand that sometimes those two things can't exist together? I was about to find out what happens when you choose respect. The next few weeks passed in a haze of small rebellions and growing clarity. I started keeping a notebook, writing down every slight, every dismissal, every moment when I felt invisible or taken for granted. At first, it was depressing, page after page of evidence that I'd been living as a secondary character in my own life. But then something interesting happened. Patterns emerged. I could see the manipulation tactics, the emotional blackmail, the way they'd trained me to expect nothing while giving everything. It was like studying a foreign language I'd been forced to speak fluently without ever understanding its grammar. Elijah called on a Thursday evening in March, his voice carrying that particular tone he used when he needed something. I could hear it in his first sentence, the way he drew out, "Hi, Mom," like he was trying to sweeten me up for whatever came next. "I hope you're doing well," he said, though I noticed he didn't pause long enough for me to actually answer. "Listen, I've got a situation here and I could really use your help." My stomach clenched automatically, the way it had learned to do whenever one of my children called with needs instead of news. "What kind of situation?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "It's the down payment for Sarah's car. We found this perfect SUV for her, and she really needs reliable transportation for taking the kids to their activities. The thing is, we need to move quickly or someone else will snatch it up. Could you transfer $5,000 to my account today?" $5,000. Said so casually, like he was asking to borrow a cup of sugar instead of 3 months of my Social Security income. $5,000, I repeated, feeling something strange happening in my chest. Not the familiar panic about disappointing him, but something else. Something that felt almost like strength. I know it sounds like a lot, but think about it as an investment in your grandchildren's safety. Emma has that gymnastics meet in Springfield next month, and Tyler's got baseball starting up. Sarah can't keep driving that death trap she's got now. My grandchildren. He was using my grandchildren as emotional leverage. The same grandchildren I saw maybe 4 times a year. The same grandchildren who called me by my first name because grandma was apparently too confusing since Sarah's mother lived closer and got that title. I found myself thinking about Mrs. Ramirez from down the hall, the elderly woman who'd moved to Chicago from Los Angeles to be closer to her daughter. She'd been bringing me soup when I was sick, checking on me during the blizzard last month, sharing stories about her own family struggles. She'd told me about setting boundaries with her own children, about learning to say no without feeling guilty. "Mija," she'd said just last week. Love doesn't mean letting people use you up like an old dish rag. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people to value. Elijah, I said, the name feeling different in my mouth, more distant. I can't give you $5,000. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for me to hear the sound of my own heartbeat. What do you mean you can't? His voice had changed, losing its fake warmth and taking on an edge I'd heard before but never acknowledged. It's not like you're using that money for anything important. Not using it for anything important. My rent, my medicine, my groceries, my utilities, none of that was important to him. I mean, I won't, I said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. I won't give you $5,000. Jesus, Mom, I'm not asking you to donate a kidney. It's just money. Money you're just sitting on while your son needs help providing for his family. His family, not our family. His family, where I was just the ATM machine with emotional complications. I said no, Elijah. Fine, he snapped, his voice going cold in that way that used to make me rush to apologize and fix whatever I'd done wrong. I'll figure it out myself. But don't expect us to keep including you in family plans if you're not going to act like family. The threat was so naked, so ugly that it took my breath away. Don't expect us to keep including you in family plans. As if being charged for parties I wasn't invited to counted as inclusion. Okay, I said quietly. Okay, what? Okay, I won't expect that. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking not from fear but from something that felt suspiciously like liberation. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. The silence in my apartment no longer felt heavy with loneliness, but light with possibility. For the first time in decades, I went to sleep without worrying about disappointing someone, without rehearsing apologies for crimes I hadn't committed, without carrying the weight of other people's problems on my shoulders. When I woke up the next morning, the sun seemed brighter coming through my kitchen window. I spent that Friday doing something I hadn't done in years. I took care of myself. I made an appointment with Dr. Martinez about the arthritis pain I'd been dismissing as normal aging. I called the community center down the street and asked about their senior programs. I walked to the library and checked out 3 books I'd been wanting to read, but never had time for because I was always worrying about someone else's needs. At the library, I ran into Mrs. Chen from church. She was returning a stack of romance novels and grinning like a teenager. "Margaret," she called out, her face lighting up. "How lovely to see you outside of Sunday morning. Are you taking some books home?" "I am," I said, holding up my modest stack. "I decided I have time to read again." "Good for you," she said, and something in her voice told me she understood more than just the surface meaning of what I'd said. Reading is how we remember we have inner lives independent of everyone else's drama. That afternoon, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I contacted a financial advisor. Roger Kowalski came recommended by Mrs. Ramirez, a grandson of one of her friends, who specialized in helping seniors protect their assets. He met me at his office in the Loop, a young man with kind eyes and the patience to explain things in ways I could understand. "Mrs. Johnson," he said after reviewing my situation, "someone has had access to your accounts for quite some time. This kind of unauthorized use can constitute financial elder abuse." Financial elder abuse? The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a fire I'd been refusing to see. What should I do? "First, we change all your passwords and access codes. Then we set up new accounts that only you can access. And Mrs. Johnson, you don't have to feel guilty about protecting yourself." With Mr. Kowalski's help, I regained control over my bank accounts for the first time in years. We set up a small monthly allowance I could give to my children if I chose to, but anything beyond that would require my explicit approval and couldn't be accessed without my physical signature. Signing those papers felt like signing my own Declaration of Independence. That night, alone in my apartment with a cup of tea and one of my library books, I experienced something I'd almost forgotten existed: peace. Not the exhausting peace of having done enough for everyone else, but the quiet peace of taking care of myself. When Nora called the next day, I could hear the irritation in her voice before she even said hello. "Mother, Elijah says you're being difficult about helping with Sarah's car." Difficult. I was being difficult by not funding their lifestyle choices with money I couldn't afford to lose. "I told Elijah I couldn't help him with that purchase," I said calmly. "Couldn't or wouldn't?" "Both." Another silence. I seem to be generating a lot of those lately. "Mother, this isn't like you. You're being selfish." Selfish. The word that had been weaponized against me my entire adult life. The word that meant I was supposed to give until it hurt, then give more. The word that meant my needs didn't matter as much as everyone else's wants. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I'm finally learning how to be a little selfish." This is ridiculous. You're acting like we've done something wrong when all we've ever done is let you be part of our lives. Let me be part of their lives. Like it was a privilege they granted me instead of a relationship we'd built together. Nora, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Do you know when my birthday is? Of course I know when your birthday is. When is it? Silence. Mother, I don't understand what point you're trying to make. My point is that you don't know when my birthday is, and you haven't called me on my birthday in 3 years. My point is that I've spent the last decade funding your lives while becoming increasingly invisible in them. My point is that I'm tired. You're being overdramatic. We all have busy lives. I'm sure you do, but I won't be funding them anymore. I hung up feeling lighter, like I'd been carrying a heavy backpack for miles and had finally decided to set it down. James called that evening, his voice full of the charm that had always been his secret weapon. Mom, hey, I heard you had some misunderstandings with Elijah and Nora. I wanted to call and clear the air. Misunderstandings, as if my refusal to be used was just a communication problem. There's no misunderstanding, James. I've decided to stop giving money to my adult children. Whoa, okay, that sounds really harsh. Look, I know we haven't been perfect kids, but we love you. You know that, right? Love, the word that was supposed to make everything else acceptable. How do you show that love? I asked. What do you mean? I mean, how do you show me that you love me? What do you do that demonstrates care for my well-being, interest in my life, concern for my happiness? Another silence. I was getting quite good at creating them. Mom, look, we're all really busy, but that doesn't mean we don't care. James, when was the last time you asked me how I was feeling? Not how I was doing, not whether I could help you with something, but how I was feeling. You never complained before. I'm not complaining now. I'm just deciding not to participate in relationships where I'm valued only for what I can provide. That's not true. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's how I feel. And I'm done pretending I don't feel it. After I hung up, I made myself dinner. A real dinner. With vegetables and seasoning and attention to how it tasted, rather than just eating to survive. I lit a candle at my small table and sat down with my meal and my book, practicing the radical act of enjoying my own company. Outside my window, Chicago was settling into evening. The city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, and for the first time in years, I felt like I might be one of them instead of just a shadow watching from the edges. Do you know what it feels like to discover you're stronger than you thought you were? To realize that all those years you spent believing you needed their approval, you were actually the one with the power? I was about to test that power in ways I never could have imagined. 2 weeks passed in blessed quiet. No emergency phone calls, no requests for money, no guilt trips about family obligations I was supposedly failing to meet. Mrs. Ramirez and I started having coffee together on Tuesday mornings, sharing stories about our lives and laughing about things that weren't really funny, but somehow became hilarious when you had someone who understood. She told me about her late husband, how he'd worked 2 jobs to support their family, but always made time for evening walks with her around their neighborhood in Los Angeles. How after he died, her children had expected her to move in with one of them, become the built-in babysitter and housekeeper, fade into the background of their lives. I told them, Mijos, I raised my children already. Now I'm going to live my own life, she said, stirring extra sugar into her coffee. They were so angry at first, but you know what? They got over it. And now they respect me more than they ever did when I was just convenient. Weren't you afraid of being alone? Mija, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I was lonelier when I was surrounded by people who took me for granted than I am now living by myself and choosing who gets my time. Her words stayed with me like seeds planted in good soil. On a Thursday in early April, I did something I'd been thinking about for weeks, but hadn't had the courage to attempt. I walked into the community center and asked about their programs for seniors. The young woman at the desk, probably about Nora's age but with kind eyes that actually looked at me when I spoke, handed me a brochure full of possibilities I'd never considered. We have a painting class that's really popular, she said, and a book club, though they're pretty serious about their discussions. Oh, and there's a new volunteer program where seniors mentor young adults who are aging out of foster care. That one's been really meaningful for people. Painting. I'd always loved art, but had never had time to try creating it myself. My hands, gnarled as they were with arthritis, could still hold a brush. Tell me about the painting class. Her name was Jessica, and she showed me to a bright room filled with easels and the smell of creativity. Canvases covered in amateur attempts at flowers, landscapes, and portraits lined the walls. Each one signed with the proud signature of someone who was learning it was never too late to try something new. We meet every Tuesday and Thursday morning. It's $15 a session, and that includes all your supplies. The teacher, Maria Santos, is wonderful, very patient, very encouraging. Would you like to try a session and see how you like it? $15. Less than what James used to spend on coffee in a single day with money he'd borrowed from me. I'd love to try it. That first painting class changed something fundamental in the way I saw myself. My hands, which I'd been thinking of as broken and useless, could still create beauty. My eyes, tired as they were, could still see light and shadow and the possibility of capturing something meaningful on canvas. Maria Santos was a woman about my age who'd started painting after her husband retired, and they no longer had any idea how to talk to each other without the buffer of daily responsibilities. I tell everyone the same thing on their first day, she said, helping me set up my easel. You're not here to create masterpieces. You're here to remember that you exist independent of everyone else's needs. My first painting was a disaster, a lopsided attempt at the view from my apartment window. But it was my disaster, created by my hands, expressing my vision of the world. When I signed my name in the corner, Margaret Johnson, it felt like claiming ownership of myself for the first time in decades. I brought it home and hung it on my refrigerator, right where I used to hang my children's artwork 40 years ago. The symmetry of it made me smile. The book club was harder. These were educated people who'd read things I'd only heard of, who had opinions about authors and themes and literary movements. But they welcomed me anyway, and I discovered that a lifetime of observing people and relationships had given me insights that academic knowledge couldn't replicate. When we discussed The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, I shared my thoughts about the complex dynamics between mothers and daughters, the way love and disappointment could become so tangled you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I think, I said during one of our discussions, that some of us spend so much time trying to be the perfect mother that we forget to be a whole person. And maybe our children can't respect us until we respect ourselves enough to exist outside of their needs. The room fell quiet, but it was the good kind of quiet, the kind where people are thinking instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. After the meeting, a woman named Patricia approached me. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed and articulate, the kind of person I would have been intimidated by just a few months earlier. What you said today really resonated with me, she said. I've been struggling with similar issues with my teenage daughter. Would you be interested in having coffee sometime and continuing the conversation? Someone wanted to continue a conversation with me. Someone found my perspective valuable enough to seek out my company. I'd like that very much, I said. For the first time in years, I was making friends instead of just taking care of family. I was becoming someone people chose to spend time with instead of someone people felt obligated to tolerate. But my family wasn't ready to let me go that easily. The confrontation came in early May, orchestrated like a military operation designed to overwhelm my defenses and force me back into my old role. Elijah called first, his voice carefully modulated to sound reasonable and concerned rather than angry. Mom, we need to talk. All of us. Can you come to dinner at my house this Sunday? Sarah's making that pot roast you like. The pot roast I like. As if they'd been regularly making food I enjoyed instead of expecting me to provide and prepare meals for gatherings I wasn't really welcome at. What do we need to talk about? Your recent decisions. We're worried about you. Worried about me. The same people who hadn't called to check on me during the flu outbreak, who hadn't noticed I'd lost 15 pounds over the winter, who hadn't asked how I was managing my arthritis pain. Now they were worried. What decisions? Mom, you know what decisions. The way you've been acting lately, cutting us off financially, refusing to help with reasonable requests. It's not like you. There it was. It's not like you. The manipulation disguised as concern. The suggestion that taking care of myself was a symptom of mental instability rather than mental health. Maybe the person I've been wasn't really me, I said. Maybe this is who I actually am when I'm not exhausted from trying to make everyone else happy. Just come to dinner, okay? We'll talk about it as a family. A family meeting. About my decision to stop funding their lives. About my choice to value myself enough to say no. About my failure to remain conveniently invisible while they helped themselves to my resources. I'll be there, I said. But I already knew this wasn't going to be the reconciliation they were probably expecting. I spent that week preparing, not by rehearsing apologies or planning compromises, but by remembering who I was becoming instead of who I'd been trained to be. I wrote in my notebook about what I wanted to say, about the boundaries I needed to maintain, about the difference between being loving and being a doormat. Mrs. Ramirez helped me practice. Remember, mija, she said as we sat in her apartment, which was arranged almost exactly like mine but somehow felt warmer, filled as it was with evidence of a life being lived for the person living it. You don't have to justify taking care of yourself. You don't have to prove that your feelings are valid. You just have to be clear about what you will and won't accept. What if they gang up on me? What if they make me feel like I'm being selfish? Then you say, maybe I am being selfish. Maybe it's time. Sunday came too soon and not soon enough. I dressed carefully, choosing my navy dress again, but this time because I liked how it looked on me, not because I was trying to please anyone else. I drove to Elijah's house in Lincoln Park, my hands steady on the wheel of my old Chevy, the spring air carrying the scent of blooming trees through my open windows. The house looked the same as always, perfectly maintained, expensively decorated, the kind of place that appeared in home magazines about successful urban professionals. I'd helped pay for some of those improvements, I realized, my down payment on their dreams of looking prosperous. Elijah answered the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I could immediately feel the tension humming beneath the surface of enforced pleasantries. Mom, you look nice. Come on in. Everyone's here. Everyone. Nora sat on the leather sofa I'd helped them buy, looking uncomfortable in the way people do when they're about to participate in something they know is wrong, but don't want to be the one to object. James leaned against the kitchen counter, his charm dialed down to a more serious setting but still radiating his particular brand of manipulative energy. Sarah was in the kitchen, making an elaborate show of preparing the pot roast that was supposed to butter me up for whatever was coming. My grandchildren were nowhere to be seen, probably sent to friends' houses so the adults could handle their business without witnessing whatever shame they were planning to heap on their grandmother. "Sit down, Mom," Elijah said, gesturing toward the chair that had clearly been designated as mine, positioned so I'd be facing all of them, like a defendant at trial. I sat, but I kept my purse in my lap and my car keys in my hand. "So," Nora began, her psychologist voice in full effect, "we wanted to talk to you about some concerning changes we've noticed in your behavior lately." Concerning changes. My decision to stop allowing them to steal from me was a concerning change in behavior. "What changes are those?" I asked. "Well, the financial restrictions for one thing," Elijah said. "Mom, we're your family. When family needs help, you help. That's what family does." "Is that what family does?" I asked. "Because I've been wondering lately what you think family means." "It means we take care of each other," James chimed in, moving from the kitchen to sit on the arm of Nora's chair, creating a united front designed to make me feel outnumbered and isolated. "Can you give me some examples of how you've taken care of me?" The silence that followed was telling. They looked at each other with the kind of glances people exchange when they realize they're not prepared for the questions being asked. "Mom, you're our mother," Nora finally said. "Taking care of you is different. You're the parent. I'm 72 years old. At what age do children start taking care of their parents instead of just taking from them? This is what we're talking about," Elijah said, his voice getting an edge to it. "This negative attitude, this, I don't know what to call it. Bitterness? It's not like you. Maybe it is like me. Maybe you just never saw it because I was too busy making sure you were happy to let you know when I wasn't. You've always been happy to help us," James said. "You've never complained before." "I was never happy to help you," I said quietly. "I was afraid not to help you." That stopped the conversation cold. Sarah even paused in her pot roast preparations to listen. "Afraid of what?" Nora asked. "Afraid that if I stopped being useful, you'd stop pretending to love me." "Mom, that's—" Elijah started. But I held up my hand. "I haven't finished. I need to say this. And I need you to hear it." I took a deep breath and felt 72 years of suppressed truth rising in my chest like floodwater finally finding a crack in the dam. "I spent 50 years of my life putting your needs before mine. I worked 2 jobs so you could have what you wanted. I went without so you wouldn't have to. I sacrificed my health, my social life, my romantic opportunities, my dreams, my security. Everything I had, I gave to you." They were all staring at me now, not with love or gratitude, but with the kind of uncomfortable attention people give to someone who's violating the unspoken rules of polite conversation. And what did I get in return? Phone calls when you needed money, visits when you needed babysitting, inclusion in family events when you needed someone to pay for them. "That's not fair," Nora protested. "We've included you in plenty of things." I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. "Like the family reunion you threw in my honor and charged to my credit card? The one I found out about by accident when I called the event planner?" The color drained from Elijah's face. James suddenly found something very interesting to look at on his shoes. Nora's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find words that didn't exist. "You knew?" Sarah called from the kitchen, her voice small. "I knew. I know about all of it. The unauthorized charges, the cash advances, the way you've been helping yourselves to my financial security while making sure I never felt secure in your affections." I stood up, still holding my purse and keys, feeling stronger than I had in years. But here's what you don't know. I'm done. I'm done being your bank account with feelings. I'm done being the grandmother you tolerate for my money and dismiss for my inconvenient emotions. I'm done buying birthday presents for people who don't remember my birthday, holiday gifts for people who don't invite me to holidays, college funds for grandchildren who don't know my middle name. Mom, James said, his charm finally giving way to panic. You're being ridiculous. We're family. Family doesn't abandon each other over money. You're right. Family doesn't abandon each other. But you abandoned me years ago. You just kept me around to pay for things. I walked to the mantelpiece where they kept their family photos, all those posed pictures of happiness and success. I was in some of them, but always on the edges, always slightly out of focus, always looking like I was grateful to be included instead of naturally belonging. I picked up a photo from last Christmas, one where I was half visible behind a stack of presents I'd bought, but wasn't really meant to be in the picture. I will no longer buy love, I said, looking at each of them in turn. I will no longer fund relationships with people who see me as a resource instead of a person. I will no longer accept crumbs of affection in exchange for full courses of financial support. I set the photo back down and walked toward the door. Respect me or lose me. Those are your options. Mom, wait, Elijah called after me, his voice finally showing some genuine emotion, though whether it was love or panic about losing his financial safety net, I couldn't tell. You can't just walk out. We can fix this. We can do better. I paused at the door and looked back at him. My first child, the baby I'd rocked through countless sleepless nights, the little boy who'd brought me dandelions and called them flowers. Can you? I asked. Can you tell me right now, without looking it up, when my birthday is? He stared at me, his mouth open, searching for information he'd never bothered to retain. Can you tell me the name of my arthritis medication? Can you tell me what book I'm reading? What I do on Tuesday mornings? Whether I've been happy or sad or lonely or afraid? Can you tell me anything about my life that doesn't involve your needs? The silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. When you can answer those questions, when you can see me as a whole person instead of just your mother who exists to make your life easier, then we can talk about being family. I walked out of that house and didn't look back, though I could hear them talking rapidly among themselves as soon as I closed the door, probably strategizing about how to manage the crisis of my newfound self-respect. Driving home through the Chicago streets I'd navigated for decades, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not pride in my children's accomplishments that I'd funded, not pride in my sacrifices that had gone unacknowledged, but pride in myself for finally standing up for my own worth. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was naive. My family had spent too many years training me to be their convenient solution to problems they didn't want to solve themselves. They weren't going to accept my Declaration of Independence without a fight. The battle was just beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in relative peace, which should have been my first warning that something was brewing. I continued with my painting classes, my book club, my coffee meetings with Mrs. Ramirez. I was learning to enjoy my own company, to fill my days with activities that brought me joy instead of obligations that brought me exhaustion. I painted a picture of the sunrise view from my kitchen window, capturing the way the light hit the building across the street, and made even this modest neighborhood look touched with gold. When I signed my name in the corner, I felt the satisfaction of creating something beautiful that belonged entirely to me. My arthritis was better too, now that I wasn't carrying the constant stress of managing everyone else's emergencies. Dr. Martinez had adjusted my medication and suggested some gentle exercises that were actually helping. When you're not lying awake at night worrying about other people's problems, your body has more energy to heal itself. But on a Tuesday evening in late May, as I was settling in with my library book and a cup of chamomile tea, my phone buzzed with a text message that made my blood run cold. It was from James, but the message felt different from his usual charm offensive. Mom, I think you should know that people are talking. Word is getting around about how you've been treating your family. You might want to reconsider your recent choices before this affects your reputation. My reputation. As if my reputation in the community mattered more than my dignity within my own family. The next morning, Mrs. Chen from church approached me after Mass with a concerned expression I'd never seen on her face before. Margaret, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right with your family? I've been hearing some concerning things. My stomach dropped. What kind of things? Well, I probably shouldn't repeat gossip, but some people are saying that you've become difficult in your old age, that you're refusing to help your children even though you have the means to do so, and they're worried about your mental state. The manipulation was so sophisticated, so calculated, that I had to admire its twisted brilliance even as it made me feel sick. They were spreading the narrative that my newfound self-respect was actually cognitive decline, that my reasonable boundaries were evidence of mental instability. Who is saying these things? Mrs. Chen looked uncomfortable. I heard it from Patricia Wu, who heard it from someone at the community center. But Margaret, I know you, and you seem perfectly clear-minded to me. I just thought you should know what people are saying. I spent that day making phone calls, gently probing to see how far the rumor campaign had spread. The story was consistent in its details. Poor Margaret Johnson, once such a generous and loving mother, had become paranoid and selfish in her declining years, cutting off her devoted children for no rational reason, possibly showing early signs of dementia. It was a masterpiece of character assassination, designed to isolate me from my community support system and force me back into compliance through social pressure and shame. But they'd underestimated how much I'd changed, how much stronger I'd become through my weeks of learning to value myself. That evening, I called Patricia from my book club, the woman who'd wanted to continue our conversation about mother-daughter relationships. Patricia, I need to ask you something directly. Have you heard rumors about me having mental problems or being cruel to my family? There was a pause. Margaret, yes, I have heard some things. But I want you to know that based on my conversations with you, I don't believe them for a second. What exactly have you heard? That you've become irrational and mean, that you're withholding financial support from your children for no good reason, that you might be experiencing some kind of cognitive decline. But Margaret, the woman I've gotten to know over the past few months is articulate, thoughtful, and, if anything, seems to be becoming more confident and self-possessed, not less. Thank you for saying that. And thank you for telling me what's being said. I'm going to handle this. But I needed to know what I was dealing with. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about my options. I could try to defend myself, go around to everyone who'd heard the rumors and explain my side of the story. I could provide proof of the financial abuse, the emotional neglect, the years of one-sided sacrifice. Or I could do something that would demonstrate once and for all that I was not the confused, declining old woman they were portraying me as. I could do something that would make it impossible for anyone to question my mental acuity or my right to make my own decisions about my own life. The next morning, I called Roger Kowalski, my financial advisor, and made an appointment to discuss a major change in my life that I'd been considering but hadn't had the courage to pursue. Mrs. Johnson, it's good to hear from you. How can I help? I want to talk about selling some assets and making a significant change in my living situation. I think it's time for me to take control of my life in a way that makes it impossible for anyone to question my mental competence. That sounds intriguing. Can you come in this afternoon? At Roger's office, I laid out my plan. I owned my apartment outright, having paid off the mortgage years ago with money I'd saved by denying myself countless small pleasures. The neighborhood was gentrifying, and my modest two-bedroom was worth considerably more than I'd ever imagined. I want to sell it and buy something smaller but nicer. Something that's obviously a choice rather than a necessity. Something that shows I'm living deliberately rather than just surviving. Roger pulled up some listings on his computer. What kind of place are you thinking? A one-bedroom condo with a view. Something in a building with a doorman and amenities. Something that makes it clear I'm living well rather than declining. Something that looks like a renewal rather than a retreat. We found it that afternoon. A beautiful one-bedroom condo in a high-rise near the lake, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the water that took my breath away. It was expensive, but well within my means once I sold my current place, and it came furnished with modern furniture that looked nothing like the hand-me-downs and thrift store finds I'd been living with for decades. But most importantly, it came with a garage space where I could keep a car that would make a statement about my mental acuity and my financial independence. Roger, I said, standing at those windows looking out at Lake Michigan sparkling in the afternoon sun, I also want to buy a car. Something that makes it clear I'm not a confused old woman who doesn't know what she's doing with her money. He grinned. What did you have in mind? I was thinking about a Porsche. The lawsuit paperwork was filed that afternoon. After reviewing the evidence of unauthorized credit card use, Roger connected me with a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. We weren't looking for criminal charges, just documentation that would legally establish that I was mentally competent and had been the victim of financial exploitation, rather than the confused perpetrator my family was portraying me as. Mrs. Johnson, this documentation will make it impossible for anyone to claim you're not capable of making your own financial decisions, the lawyer explained. And the resolution of the case will demonstrate that you've taken appropriate legal action to protect yourself, which is not something a person with cognitive decline would typically be able to do. Everything moved quickly after that. The paperwork for selling my apartment, buying the condo, and purchasing a 3-year-old Porsche Cayenne in pristine condition. Not flashy, but clearly expensive and well-maintained. The kind of car that said I knew exactly what I was doing with my money and my life. The day I picked up the Porsche, I drove it straight to my painting class. Maria Santos took one look at me stepping out of that gleaming silver SUV and started laughing. "Margaret Johnson, you are full of surprises. How does it feel?" "Like freedom," I said, and I meant it. Word spread quickly through the community grapevine that worked both ways. The same networks that had carried gossip about my supposed decline now carried the news of my obvious renaissance. Margaret Johnson, the woman who'd supposedly become irrational and mean, had just made a series of sophisticated financial decisions that demonstrated impressive planning and mental acuity. The rumors about my cognitive decline died as quickly as they'd started. It's hard to claim someone is losing their mind when they're clearly making smart decisions and living well. But my family wasn't ready to give up their campaign to regain control over me and my resources. The day before I was supposed to move into my new condo, Nora called with an offer that was supposed to sound generous but actually made my skin crawl. "Mother, we've been thinking about everything that's happened, and we want to make things right. We found you a lovely assisted living facility in Lincoln Park, very close to Elijah's house. It's expensive, but we're willing to help contribute to the cost." An assisted living facility. They wanted to put me in institutional care while I was healthy, financially secure, and more mentally sharp than I'd been in years. Why would I want to live in an assisted living facility? Well, you're not getting any younger, and living alone can be dangerous at your age. Plus, it would give us peace of mind knowing you're being taken care of properly. Taken care of properly. By strangers in an institution where my financial assets would presumably be more accessible to them as my legal next of kin. "Nora, I just bought a condo and a new car. Do those sound like the actions of someone who needs assisted living?" "Mother, that's exactly what we're worried about. These impulsive, expensive purchases, this sudden change in personality. We think you might need professional evaluation to make sure you're making decisions that are really in your best interest." Professional evaluation. They were threatening to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could regain control over my finances. I see. And who would make these decisions about what's in my best interest? Well, we would, as your children. We love you and want what's best for you. I hung up without responding and immediately called my lawyer. "They're threatening competency proceedings," I told him. "Can they do that?" "They can try, but based on the documentation we have about your recent financial planning and the legal resolution of the abuse case, it would be very difficult for them to make that case stick. However, we should be prepared." "What do you recommend?" "A full neuropsychological evaluation from an independent doctor. Get it done now while you're clearly functioning at a high level, and use it as evidence of your competence if they try to challenge your decision-making capacity." The evaluation took 3 hours and covered everything from memory tests to problem-solving exercises to assessments of my judgment and reasoning skills. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the neuropsychologist, was thorough but kind. "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know that your cognitive function is not only normal for your age, it's actually quite impressive. Your memory, reasoning, and decision-making abilities are all well above average. Whatever life changes you've made recently, you're clearly making them from a position of mental strength, not decline." Armed with that evaluation and the documentation of my successful financial planning, I felt ready for whatever my family might try next. But I wasn't prepared for how personal their final attack would be. The confrontation came on a Saturday morning in early June, just as I was preparing to leave my old apartment for the last time. I'd spent the week packing up 50 years of accumulated possessions, deciding what to take to my new life, and what to leave behind as relics of my old one. Mrs. Ramirez had helped me sort through photo albums, helping me distinguish between memories worth keeping and memories I was ready to release. We'd packed away the pictures from holidays I'd funded but been excluded from, family vacations I'd paid for but been treated as invisible during, graduations and weddings where I'd been acknowledged for my financial contributions but not for my emotional role. "Keep the ones where you look happy," she'd advised. "Let go of the ones where you look like you're trying to disappear." I was loading the last box into my new Porsche when all 3 of my children appeared on my sidewalk like a committee of intervention specialists. They must have coordinated their arrival because they showed up at exactly the same time from different directions, creating a human barrier between me and my car. "Mom, we need to talk to you," Elijah said, his voice carrying the kind of forced calm people use when they're trying not to spook a wild animal. "We're worried about you," Nora added, her psychologist voice in full effect. "These major life changes, the spending, the isolation from family, these are all warning signs." "Warning signs of what?" "Of someone who's not thinking clearly. James said, his charm replaced by something that looked almost like genuine concern. Mom, people your age are vulnerable to all kinds of influences. Maybe someone is taking advantage of your confusion. Someone taking advantage of my confusion. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. You think someone is manipulating me into taking care of myself? Mom, you just spent 6 figures on a condo and a luxury car, Elijah said. That's not rational behavior for someone on a fixed income. My fixed income is larger than you think it is. I've been living modestly for years, saving money while I funded your lifestyles. Now I'm spending some of my own money on my own life. But what about your future? Nora asked. What about medical expenses, long-term care needs? You're being irresponsible with resources you might need later. What about your futures? I countered. Are you worried about my security or your inheritances? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. That's a horrible thing to say, James protested, but his eyes didn't meet mine. Is it? Because I'm starting to think that's what this has always been about. Not love, not concern, but money. My money, and your access to it. Mom, that's paranoid thinking, Nora said. You're starting to sound like you believe everyone is out to get you. Not everyone. Just the people who've been taking my money without permission, spreading rumors about my mental health, and now trying to have me declared incompetent so you can regain control over my finances. Elijah's face flushed red. We never tried to have you declared incompetent. Then what was that conversation yesterday about professional evaluation and making decisions in my best interest? They looked at each other with the kind of glances that confirmed they'd been strategizing about me behind my back. Look, I said, opening my car door and preparing to leave this conversation and this chapter of my life behind. I'm going to say this one more time, and then I'm done explaining myself to people who've spent the last decade treating me like a walking ATM machine. I turned to face them. These 3 adults I'd raised from helpless babies into functioning humans. These people who shared my DNA, but apparently none of my capacity for genuine love. I am 72 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I am living for myself instead of for other people. I am mentally competent, financially secure, and emotionally healthier than I've been in decades. I have friends who value my company, activities that bring me joy, and a beautiful new home that I bought with my own money that I earned and saved. I got into my car and rolled down the window. If you want to be part of my new life, you're welcome, but you'll be joining it as equals who care about my well-being, not as children who expect me to fund your comfort while ignoring my happiness. If you can't do that, then I wish you well, but I won't be available for further financial or emotional exploitation. I started the engine and began to pull away from the curb, leaving them standing on the sidewalk looking like they'd been slapped. But just as I reached the corner, James ran after my car, calling my name with something in his voice I hadn't heard in years, something that sounded almost like genuine panic. I stopped the car and rolled the window back down. Mom, wait, please. I know we haven't been good to you. I know we've taken advantage of your generosity, but you're our mother. We need you. For just a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of maternal responsibility, the urge to fix their problems and soothe their distress and make everything better regardless of the cost to myself. But then I looked at his face and realized what I was seeing wasn't love or remorse. It was fear about losing access to my resources. James, I said gently, you don't need me. You need my money. There's a difference. I drove away without looking back, heading toward my new life in a building where the doorman would greet me by name, where I had a view of the lake that belonged to me, where I could paint pictures of sunsets and read books chosen for my own pleasure, and have coffee with people who enjoyed my company without expecting anything in return. But even as I felt the liberation of finally choosing myself, I knew this wasn't over. My family had too much invested in their version of our relationship to let my independence stand without one final challenge. The test came sooner than I expected. I'd been living in my new condo for just 2 weeks, reveling in the morning light that streamed through my floor-to-ceiling windows and the evening peace of watching boats move across the lake like distant prayers. My new life was settling into a rhythm that felt both foreign and deeply right. Painting classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, book club on Wednesday evenings, weekend visits to museums and galleries I'd been wanting to explore for years, but never had time for when I was managing everyone else's crises. Mrs. Ramirez had helped me arrange my furniture and hang my amateur paintings, and she'd been delighted to discover that my new building had a beautiful rooftop garden, where we could have our Tuesday morning coffee with a view of the city sprawling out around us like a promise of possibilities. You look different, she'd said just that morning, studying my face in the way people do when they're trying to identify what's changed. Younger, but not in a desperate way. Younger in a way that comes from the inside. I felt different too. My arthritis pain had continued to improve, probably because I was sleeping better and stressing less. My appetite had returned, not just for food, but for life, for new experiences, for the simple pleasure of making choices based on what would make me happy, instead of what would keep other people from being angry with me. I'd even started dating, of sorts. Harold Fletcher from my book club had asked if I'd like to have dinner with him sometime, and instead of automatically thinking of all the reasons why I couldn't or shouldn't, I'd said yes. Our first dinner had been at a quiet Italian restaurant in Little Italy, where we'd talked about books and travel and the strange freedom that comes with reaching an age where you finally stop caring what other people think and start caring what you think. I spent 40 years married to a woman who never read anything more challenging than People magazine, Harold had told me over wine and pasta. It's lovely to have dinner with someone who has opinions about literature. I spent 50 years taking care of people who never asked me what I wanted to read, I'd replied. It's lovely to have dinner with someone who cares about my opinions. We'd made plans for a second date, and I'd found myself looking forward to it with the kind of anticipation I hadn't felt since I was young, and everything seemed possible. So when my phone rang at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening, displaying Nora's name, I answered it feeling strong enough to handle whatever new manipulation they'd concocted. Mother, I'm calling to give you one last chance to reconsider your recent decisions. One last chance. As if my choices about my own life were mistakes she was graciously allowing me to correct. What decisions are those, Nora? All of it. The condo, the car, the way you've been treating your family. We've been very patient, but our patience is running out. What happens when your patience runs out? We'll be forced to take legal action to protect you from yourself. There it was. The final threat, delivered with the clinical detachment she'd learned in graduate school. Legal action? A conservatorship, Mother. We have documentation of your erratic behavior, your impulsive spending, your paranoid beliefs about family members who love you. We have witness statements about your declining social functioning and your inappropriate financial decisions. My hand started shaking, not with fear, but with rage so pure it felt like electricity running through my veins. You have witness statements? From people in your former neighborhood who noticed your increasing isolation and strange behavior. From family friends who've observed your declining social skills and your inappropriate responses to normal family dynamics. They'd been building a case against me for weeks, collecting statements from people who didn't know the full story, painting my newfound self-respect as evidence of mental decline. I see. And what would this conservatorship involve? We'd take control of your financial affairs to prevent you from making any more impulsive decisions that could jeopardize your security. We'd also make decisions about your living situation. Probably that assisted living facility I mentioned would be the best option. They wanted to lock me up and take my money. They wanted to undo everything I'd built for myself and reduce me back to a manageable asset they could control and exploit. Nora, I need to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. I'm listening. I had a full neuropsychological evaluation done by Dr. Sarah Mitchell 3 weeks ago. The results show that my cognitive function is not only normal but above average for my age. I also have legal documentation of the financial abuse I experienced from my family, which has been resolved through proper legal channels. My recent purchases were made in consultation with a financial advisor and are well within my means and completely appropriate for someone with my assets and income. Silence on the other end of the line. Any attempt to have me declared incompetent will be met with evidence that I am not only competent, but was the victim of financial elder abuse by the very people who are now claiming to be protecting me. More silence. Furthermore, I've already spoken to my attorney about the possibility that you might try something like this. He assures me that given the documentation we have, any conservatorship petition would not only fail, but would likely result in legal consequences for anyone who filed false claims about my mental condition. When Nora finally spoke, her voice had lost its clinical authority and taken on a tone I'd never heard from her before, something that sounded almost like respect. You've been planning this. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. Mother, we never meant for things to get this bad between us. Yes, you did. You meant for me to stay quiet and grateful and convenient. You meant for me to fund your lives while staying invisible in them. You meant for me to accept whatever crumbs of attention you felt like offering while never asking for more. That's not true. Can you tell me what book I'm reading right now? Silence. Can you tell me what I did last Tuesday morning? More silence. Can you tell me the name of one person I consider a friend? Mother, you can't, because you've never asked. In 50 years of taking from me, you never once asked what I might need or want or dream about. You never saw me as a person separate from my utility to you. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line, but I felt no urge to comfort her the way I once would have. I'm not angry with you anymore, Nora. Anger requires hope that things could be different. I'm just done. What does that mean? It means I'm living my life now. If you want to be part of it, you know where to find me. But you'll be joining me as an equal who values my company, not as a child who expects me to fund your comfort while ignoring my happiness. I hung up and turned off my phone. That night, I stood at my windows looking out at the lake in moonlight, feeling something I'd never experienced before in my entire adult life, complete freedom from other people's expectations. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was just free. But the story wasn't over yet. Because sometimes, when you finally stand up for yourself, the people who've been taking advantage of your kindness realize what they've lost and make one final attempt to win it back. The surprise came 3 days before Christmas, 6 months after my declaration of independence from my family's financial and emotional exploitation. I was getting ready for my evening walk along the lakefront, bundling up against Chicago's December wind, when the doorman called to tell me I had visitors. "Mrs. Johnson, there's a young woman and a boy here to see you. Says she's your granddaughter, Emma, Elijah's 15-year-old daughter, whom I'd seen maybe 6 times in the past 2 years and who'd been absent from every family gathering where I'd been expected to provide financial support, but not emotional input." "Send them up," I said, curiosity overriding caution. When I opened my door, Emma stood in the hallway looking nervous but determined, holding the hand of a boy who appeared to be about 10, Tyler, James's son, whom I recognized from photos but had met in person perhaps twice. "Grandma Margaret," Emma said, her voice small but clear. "We need to talk to you." I invited them in, noting how they both looked around my new condo with wide eyes, taking in the view, the modern furniture, the paintings I'd created hanging on walls where they could catch the light. "This is beautiful," Emma said softly. "Mom said you'd bought some little apartment, but this is... wow. Why are you here?" I asked, not unkindly, but not ready to trust this unexpected visit. Emma and Tyler looked at each other with the kind of glance children share when they're about to reveal adult secrets they're not supposed to know. "We heard them talking," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All the grown-ups. They've been having meetings about you, saying things we don't think are true." "What kind of things?" "That you're sick," Emma said, tears starting in her eyes. "That you've become mean and crazy and that they need to put you somewhere safe because you can't take care of yourself anymore." "But we don't think you're crazy," Tyler added quickly. "We think you're different now, but different in a good way. You seem, I don't know, happier?" Emma nodded vigorously. "When we saw you at Dad's house that day in the spring, when you told everyone they had to respect you or lose you, that was the coolest thing anyone's ever said. I've been thinking about it for months." "You have? Grandma Margaret, can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Why didn't you ever tell us that Dad and Uncle James and Mom were being mean to you? Why didn't you tell us they were taking your money without asking?" The question hit me like a physical blow. In all my focus on standing up to my adult children, I'd never considered that their children, my grandchildren, might have been watching, might have been forming their own opinions about the family dynamics they were witnessing. "I thought that was between me and your parents," I said carefully. "I didn't want to put you children in the middle of adult problems. But we are in the middle," Tyler said. "We live in the middle. We see how they act." Emma pulled out her phone and showed me a series of text messages. "Look what Mom sent to Aunt Nora yesterday." The messages made my blood run cold. Detailed plans for having me evaluated during what they'd described to me as a Christmas dinner invitation. Plans to have someone they described as a professional observe my behavior and provide documentation for their conservatorship petition. Plans to use my grandchildren as witnesses to my supposed decline. "They want us to say you've been acting strange," Emma said, her young face fierce with indignation. "They want us to tell lies about you so they can prove you're not okay." "And we won't do it," Tyler added. "We came here to warn you, and also to tell you something else." "What?" "We've been saving our allowance money," Emma said. "Both of us. We want to buy you a Christmas present, but not just any Christmas present. We want to buy you something that shows we understand what you did was brave." She pulled a small wrapped package from her backpack. "It's not expensive," she said apologetically. "We're just kids. We don't have much money. But we wanted you to have something that came from us, not from our parents' credit cards or anything like that." I unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a small silver picture frame, and in it was a photo I'd never seen before. A picture of me from the previous summer, taken at one of the few family gatherings I'd attended. But in this photo, I wasn't on the edges or half hidden behind presents. I was in the center, laughing at something Tyler had said, looking genuinely happy and engaged. "Emma took that picture," Tyler said proudly. She said it was the only photo she had where you looked like yourself instead of like you were trying to disappear. We want you to know that we see you, Emma added. Not just as the person who used to give us money for things, but as our grandma who has her own life and her own feelings. And we think what you did was awesome. I started crying then. Not the bitter tears I'd shed over my children's betrayal, but tears of relief and joy at being seen and understood by these young people who'd been watching and learning and forming their own judgments about right and wrong. There's something else, Emma said. We don't want to be part of their plan to hurt you. If they try to make us say things that aren't true, we're going to refuse. And if they try to force us, we're going to tell the truth, that you're the happiest we've ever seen you, that you seem really smart and independent, and that we're proud of you for standing up for yourself. That night, after Emma and Tyler had left, but not before I'd shown them my paintings and let them help me make hot chocolate from the fancy cocoa I'd bought for myself just because I liked the taste, I called my lawyer. They're planning to ambush me at Christmas dinner, I told him. They want to have me observed by some kind of professional and use my grandchildren as witnesses to my supposed decline. Are you planning to attend this dinner? I wasn't. I've been assuming I wouldn't be invited to family Christmas, given how things have gone this year. My advice would be to stay away. Don't give them the opportunity to create a situation they can use against you. But something else was forming in my mind, a plan that felt both risky and absolutely right. Actually, I said, I think I'm going to surprise them instead. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, and I woke up in my beautiful condo feeling something I'd never experienced on Christmas before: complete peace. No rushing around preparing food for people who barely acknowledged my effort, no anxiety about whether my gifts would be appreciated, no dread about being invisible at gatherings I'd been expected to fund. I made myself a leisurely breakfast and opened the gifts I'd bought for myself. A set of professional painting brushes and a beautiful silk scarf I'd been admiring for months, but had never felt justified in purchasing. Then I got dressed in my best outfit, loaded a carefully chosen selection of gifts into my Porsche, and drove to Elijah's house in Lincoln Park for what I suspected would be my final performance as a member of this particular family. I'd called ahead, telling Elijah I wanted to come by briefly to drop off presents for the grandchildren. I won't stay long, I'd assured him. I know things have been tense between us. Oh, Mom, that's great, he'd said, his voice carrying a tone of false relief that probably meant his plans for having me evaluated were still in place. We'll all be here. It'll be nice to see you. When I arrived, I could see the setup immediately. A woman I didn't recognize sitting in the living room introduced to me as Sarah's friend Janet, who works in geriatric care. The way everyone was positioned to observe me, the slightly too bright smiles, the careful attention to my every word and gesture. They were documenting my behavior for their case against me. Mom, you look wonderful, Nora said, and I could tell she was performing for Janet, the geriatric care worker. How are you feeling? I'm feeling excellent, I said clearly. I've been looking forward to seeing my grandchildren. Emma and Tyler appeared almost immediately, and I could see in their eyes that they understood what was happening and were ready to play their parts. Not in their parents' drama, but in mine. I distributed the gifts I'd brought, thoughtful, appropriate presents that demonstrated my awareness of each grandchild's interests and personality. Emma got art supplies and a book about women artists. Tyler got a baseball signed by a Cubs player he admired and a book about the history of Wrigley Field. These are perfect, Emma said, hugging me tightly. Thank you, Grandma Margaret. You remembered that I'm trying to learn about art history, Tyler added. Mom didn't even remember I was taking that class at school. I could see Janet, the geriatric care worker, taking notes. Probably not the kind of notes my family had been hoping for. Then I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I pulled out one more gift, a large envelope I handed to Elijah. What's this? He asked. Open it and see. Inside were the keys to my old Porsche, along with the title, transfer papers, and a letter. Mom, I don't understand, Elijah said, his voice uncertain. I'm giving you the car, I said clearly. Merry Christmas. The room fell completely silent. Every adult face showed the same expression of confusion and suspicion. This didn't fit their narrative of the selfish, declining old woman who'd become too attached to her possessions. Why? Nora asked. Because I've realized something important. The car was never really about the car. It was about proving to myself that I could make choices about my own life. Now that I've proven that, I don't need the car anymore. I could see Janet scribbling furiously in her notebook. But more than that, I continued, I want to give you something while I'm here to see you enjoy it, rather than leaving it for you to fight over after I'm gone. Mom, you don't have to, James started. I'm not done, I said, pulling out a second envelope. This is for all three of you. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000. 1/3 of what I'd received from the sale of my old apartment after accounting for the purchase of my new condo and car. I want you to have this money now, while I can watch you decide what to do with it. I want to see what choices you make when you receive abundance rather than just taking it. The silence in the room was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. There's one condition, I said. This gift comes with the understanding that our financial relationship ends here. I will not be providing loans, gifts, emergencies funding, or inheritance advances beyond this point. What I've given you today is my final contribution to your financial lives. I could see them all doing mental calculations, trying to figure out if $50,000 plus a luxury car was worth more than ongoing access to my resources. Mom, Elijah said carefully, you don't have to do this. We can work things out between us. I'm sure we can, I agreed. But not around money. If we're going to have relationships going forward, they'll need to be based on genuine affection and mutual respect, not financial dependency. I turned to Janet, who was still taking notes. I hope you've gotten what you need for your evaluation, I said pleasantly. As you can see, I'm capable of making sophisticated financial decisions, planning for contingencies, and demonstrating generosity while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Janet looked up from her notebook, clearly uncomfortable. Mrs. Johnson, I think there may have been some miscommunication about why I'm here. I'm sure there has been, I said. I hope you'll include in your notes that I appeared mentally competent, financially responsible, and emotionally stable during your observation. I kissed each of my grandchildren goodbye, noting that they both whispered, "We're proud of you," as I hugged them. I'll be going now, I announced to the room. Thank you for including me in your Christmas morning. As I walked toward the door, Elijah caught up with me. Mom, wait. The conservatorship thing. That's not going to happen. We were just worried about you, but I can see you're actually doing really well. I am doing really well, I agreed. Better than I have in years. Could we maybe start over? Try to build something better between us? I looked at his face, searching for genuine remorse rather than just concern about losing the car and money I'd given him. Elijah, can you tell me what book I'm reading right now? He looked blank. Can you tell me what I do on Tuesday mornings? Still blank. Can you tell me the name of one person I consider a friend? Mom, when you can answer those questions, when you're curious about my life rather than just concerned about your access to my resources, then yes, we can start over. But it will have to be based on genuine interest in who I am as a person, not just as your mother who exists to make your life easier. I left them with that thought and drove back to my beautiful condo where Mrs. Ramirez was waiting with a bottle of champagne and a plan to spend Christmas afternoon walking along the lakefront before cooking dinner together. How did it go, mija? I think, I said, looking out at the lake sparkling under the winter sun. I just graduated from being their mother to being my own person. That night, as Chicago settled into Christmas evening, and I sat in my perfect living room with my perfect view and my imperfect but utterly authentic new life, I realized that the greatest gift I'd ever given myself was the courage to stop being who other people needed me to be and start being who I actually was. The phone rang once that evening, Harold calling to wish me Merry Christmas and confirm our plans for dinner the next day. We talked for an hour about books and travel, and the strange liberation that comes with reaching an age where you finally understand that other people's opinions of you are not your responsibility. Margaret, he said before we hung up, I hope you know what a gift it's been, getting to know you as you actually are, rather than as someone performing the role of who they think you should be. Harold, I said, that might be the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. We both laughed, and I realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the frantic joy of finally pleasing someone else, but the quiet satisfaction of being at peace with your own choices. As I settled into sleep that night in my beautiful bedroom with its view of the city lights reflecting on the lake, I thought about the year that had transformed me from an invisible bank account with emotions into a woman with her own opinions, her own friendships, her own dreams worth pursuing. Had I lost my family? In some ways, yes. But what I'd lost was the illusion of family, the performance of love that was really just a transaction, the pretense of caring that was really just convenience. What I'd gained was something far more valuable, myself. And if my children someday chose to know that person rather than just use her, then perhaps we could build something real together. But if not, I would be fine. Better than fine. I would be free. 6 months later, as spring returned to Chicago and the lakefront came alive with joggers and families and couples walking hand in hand, I stood at my easel in my sunny living room, painting the view from my windows. The painting wasn't technically perfect, but it captured something true about the light on the water and the way the city looked when you saw it through eyes that belonged to someone who was finally fully choosing to be alive. Mrs. Ramirez was in the kitchen making coffee for our Tuesday morning ritual. Harold was coming for dinner that evening. We'd been seeing each other for nearly a year now, taking our time, enjoying the luxury of getting to know each other without the pressure of solving each other's problems or filling each other's voids. My phone buzzed with a text message. For just a moment, I felt the old familiar clench in my stomach, the conditioned response to unexpected contact that might bring demands or drama or emotional manipulation. But when I looked at the screen, the message was from Emma. Grandma Margaret, I got into the art program at the high school I wanted. Thank you for believing I was creative before anyone else did. Can I come show you my portfolio sometime? I smiled and texted back. I would love to see your work. And Emma, I'm proud of you for pursuing what makes you happy. Her response came immediately. I learned that from you. As I stood there in my beautiful home, surrounded by evidence of a life lived for myself rather than through others, I felt something I'd never experienced before in my 73 years. Complete contentment. Not the contentment that comes from having done enough for everyone else, but the deeper satisfaction of having finally done right by myself. The woman in my paintings, the one with the confident brushstrokes and the view of the lake, wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't performing anymore. She wasn't apologizing for taking up space or asking permission to exist. She was just living, fully and authentically, in a life she'd chosen, rather than a life that had been chosen for her. And that, I realized, was the greatest inheritance I could possibly leave to my grandchildren. The example of a woman who learned it was never too late to choose herself. Some evenings, when the light on the lake was particularly beautiful and I was feeling philosophical, I would think about that terrible Thanksgiving when they told me I was a disgrace. That woman who sat at their table, invisible and trembling, accepting their judgment as truth. She felt like someone I'd once known, rather than someone I'd been. The journey from that kitchen table to this lakefront condo hadn't been easy. It had required me to disappoint people who were used to my infinite compliance, to set boundaries with people who'd been trained to expect I had none, to choose my own well-being over their convenience. But every difficult conversation, every moment of standing firm when it would have been easier to give in, every choice to value myself when others didn't, it had all led to this: a life worth living, a person worth being, a future worth looking forward to. If you're listening to this story and something in it sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in that woman who gave and gave until she'd given herself away, I want you to know something. It's never too late to choose differently. It's never too late to stop buying love with your resources and start requiring it to be earned through respect. It's never too late to stop accepting crumbs and start expecting the full meal of authentic relationship. It's never too late to look in the mirror and see someone valuable enough to protect, defend, and prioritize. The people who truly love you will adjust to your new boundaries. The people who don't will reveal themselves by their resistance to treating you well. Either way, you'll know the truth. And the truth, even when it's painful, is always better than the beautiful lie that you don't matter as much as everyone else. You matter. Your feelings matter. Your needs matter. Your dreams matter. You matter enough to fight for, even if, especially if, you have to fight for yourself. Have you ever lived through something like what I've shared with you today? Have you known someone who needed to hear that their worth isn't measured by their willingness to be used? Please share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let others know they're not alone in their struggle to choose themselves. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that you deserve better than you've been accepting, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me keep sharing these truths that too many of us learn too late in life. Because sometimes, the greatest gift we can give ourselves, and the greatest example we can set for others, is the courage to say we deserve better, and then to live like we believe it. Thank you for listening to my heart. Thank you for letting me share the hardest and most important lesson I've ever learned. That love without respect isn't love at all, and it's never too late to stop accepting the counterfeit version and start requiring the real thing. Until next time, remember, you are worth fighting for, especially when you're the one who has to do the fighting.